Welcome to CKLA Chats. I am DLC Foster Yankey, and in this video, we're going to chat about Lesson 4, a closer look at the influence and practices of the church in 5th grade Unit 6, which is all about the Reformation. So the core text for this lesson is Setting the Stage for Reform. Students read this text in the previous lesson, and they're rereading it in this lesson to examine the author's words, phrases, and devices used to describe the church's influence and the practices challenged by reformers. Okay, so we're going to start with the first component, which is reading. The cub for reading is students will know literary devices. They will understand that authors use words, phrases, and devices to support their claim about the church's influence and practices. And they'll be able to explain orally to the class how the author uses certain words, phrases, and devices to describe the church's influence and the practices challenged by reformers in setting the stage for reform. All right, so reading is divided into 3 subcomponents for a total of 45 minutes. The first subcomponent is close reading, which is 30 minutes out of the 45 minutes. For this section, the teacher is going to begin by reviewing student responses to activity page 3.2, which was assigned for homework in the previous lesson. Afterwards, they're going to let the students know that they're going to reread parts of chapter 3, Setting the Stage for Reform. And then they'll explain that during the second reading, they're going to be focusing on details used by the author, such as certain vocabulary words and sayings and phrases, to gain a deeper understanding of the influence and practices of the church and why some practices needed to be reformed. Once students have located the first page of the chapter, a volunteer is going to read the big question at the beginning of the chapter. It's the same question that they discussed in the previous day's lesson. The teacher's going to make sure that they understand what the question is asking. And the class will read the chapter title together, Setting the Stage for Reform. As they read portions of the chapter, the teacher is going to be pausing throughout to explain and clarify the text at each point indicated, and have students answer questions posed either individually, as partners, or in groups. So it's really up to the teacher how students have discussions about this chapter. Okay, so on the next couple of slides, I just have the text that the students are going to be reading. Just to bring to your attention, they're not rereading the entire text. They're only reading certain parts, and then the teacher is posing questions. So I've included the pages and the questions that the teacher will be asking for this component of the lesson. Sometimes they reread a whole page and the teacher asks a question, but most of the time it's just parts of the pages. Okay. So part of this page, the teacher asks a question and repeat, either individually, with a partner, or in small groups, until they get to the end of the chapter, which I think, there we go. So once they have completed their close read, there's going to be a 10-minute wrap-up where students will work in small groups to answer questions about the chapter, which are the 2 questions on the screen. What details does the author use to support his or her claim that the Catholic Church was very important to Europeans in the Middle Ages? And although the church had some positive influences on many people's lives, why did some people, such as Martin Luther, seek to reform the church during the 14 and 1500s? And what were some of the negative practices of the church? So like I said, they'll discuss that in small groups for 10 minutes. And then when time is up, the groups will share out with the class. From there, they'll move on to 5 minutes of word work. Their word for this lesson is devout. Per the word work routine, the teacher is going to use the word in context in the sentence that is found in the reader, have the students repeat the word, give them the definition and a sample sentence. They'll ask whether they know of anyone who is a devout follower of something, and students will respond using the word devout. The teacher will ask for the part of speech and conclude word work with a synonyms and antonyms activity. Where they will ask for words that have similar and opposite meanings of devout and guide students to use the word devout in a complete sentence. For example, an antonym of devout is, and students will fill in the blank. From there, they'll move on to the next component, which is language. Language is divided into two 15-minute components for a total of 30 minutes. The first subcomponent is grammar, subject linking verb agreement. So for this component, you'll see the teacher reminding students that they have learned about subject linking verb agreement in the past and present tenses and reviewing what linking verbs do and do not do. The teacher will share example sentences using are, which are the two sentences on the screen, and then remind students that there are a small number of other verbs that may also function as linking verbs, in addition to forms of the verb to be. There's a check for understanding, where the teacher clarifies for students that when a senses verb is used as an action followed by a noun rather than an adjective, it is not a linking verb. So it's not really a check for understanding, it's more of just a clarification. Next, the teacher is going to direct students' attention to the subject linking verb agreement in the present tense poster and invite students to give examples of singular and plural nouns, preferably examples from this unit's content. And the teacher will be writing their examples on the board or on chart paper. Then the teacher is going to review the correct verb form for singular and plural, singular nouns and pronouns. From there, the teacher will move on to directing the students' attention to the subject linking verb agreement in the past tense poster and invite students to give examples of singular and plural nouns, again, preferably from this unit's content. And again, they'll write the examples the students provide on the board or on chart paper. The teacher then reviews the correct form of the verb to be when the subject is a singular or plural noun or pronoun. Okay, next, the teacher is going to point to the first sentence prepared in advance and ask students for the correct linking verb, suggesting that they refer to the posters, the anchor charts, as necessary. The teacher is going to explain that the sentence is written in the present tense and that the subject is singular, which means the correct linking verb is. The printing press is an important invention. And from there, students are going to provide the correct linking verbs and forms for the remaining sentences, referring to the posters as needed. So for the next 3 sentences. Next, students will turn to activity page 4.1. The teacher will read the directions with the students and they'll complete number 1 together. Then students will complete the remainder of the page 4 homework. And though that is the same activity page. Next, they'll move on to morphology for 15 minutes. The teacher is going to begin by referring to the prefixes poster that they should have up in their room and reminding students that prefixes are added to the beginning of root words to make new words. They'll point to the prefix en, and ask students to read what it means, then tell students that she'll give them 2 word choices. Some words are root words and some words are affixed words. Then she'll read a statement and students will decide which of the word choices the statement demonstrates. There's a check for understanding where the teacher defines affix as needed, just letting them know what an affix is. They'll say a few root words and a few affixed words and have students raise their hands to identify each. Okay, and this is a continuation of the check for understanding. So they're reading the sentence basically, danger or in danger, building a highway through the valley might ruin the habitat of the animals that live there. and students give the correct word. Is it danger or in danger? And they do that for all 4 sentences. Okay. Once they have completed that activity, students are going to turn to activity page 4.2. The teacher will read the directions and the class will complete the first item together. Students will complete the rest of the activity page independently, and they'll review answers either as a class or the teacher can grade those at a later time. And then they move on to strong verbs for 15 minutes. In this lesson, the teacher is going to tell students that they're learning how choosing strong verbs will improve their writing. They'll talk about what strong verbs do and how the strength of a verb is determined. They'll share examples of 2 versions of the same sentence, one with a strong verb and one without a strong verb. Then they'll give examples of stronger versions of the verb says and explain that when students write, they should try to capture the reader's attention and convey their point precisely by choosing strong verbs. Then they'll direct students' attention to the sentence on the board, which is the sentence here on the screen. The student walked into the room. They'll give students 2 minutes to think of and discuss more interesting verbs for walked, and they'll do that in a think, pair, share. When they come back together, pairs are going to act out their favorite choices and see if they can guess, if other students can guess the words. So kind of like a charades. Then they'll move on to activity page 4.3. The teacher will read the directions and the class will complete number 1 together. Students will complete the remainder of the activity independently. The teacher will conclude the lesson with a check for understanding. Well, they'll explain that using strong verbs is especially important when speaking and clarify that when writing, punctuation can be used to help show exclamation or emotion. They'll also clarify that although variety and emotion for many verbs is important, it is not always necessary to replace the word said when writing. So they'll say a few words and they'll have students give a thumbs up for strong verbs and a thumbs down for weak verbs. And that concludes lesson 4. Thanks for watching.